Cruel words from my daughter-in-law betrayed our family. I read them once, twice, until the kitchen light seemed to hum louder than my breath. Trust shattered in one night. Stay with me to the end to learn the boundary that saved me. The message arrived after a silent Christmas, as if the calendar had skipped my house. A second note blinked beneath it, careless and bright. They were in Spain, only the ones who really matter. In 48 hours, a single bank alert would flip the power in this house. But I did not know that yet. I set the phone down, palm to wood, feeling the table's cool grain anchor me. Outside, the yard wore a thin frost, the maple we planted in our 30s casting a spidery shadow. Thomas had called our December quiet. David had said, "We'll see." Rachel had smiled through Thanksgiving as if rehearsal dinner and verdict were the same thing. I thought of the church vows, the wedding toasts, the nights we counted change at this very table. A text should not erase a life, yet the room felt newly rented, my name smudged from the lease. I walked to the study and turned the lamp low. His desk looked staged for a photograph, pens aligned, stapler squared to the blotter. On the calendar, ink ghosts lingered where December had been written, then erased. In the trash, a receipt corner showed MAD, the airport code that used to thrill me. Madrid had been our someday trip. Someday apparently did not include me. I pressed my fingers against the leather chair I bought for his 60th, and it squeaked like a small confession. 43 years, and the room suddenly felt like a borrowed office with my name misspelled. A memory stepped forward, as memories do when invited by pain. October, when Rachel began saying Tom, though no one else ever had. September, when David laughed lightly about my forgetfulness and then spoke for me at dinner as if translation were needed. Little edits, harmless on their own, stitched into a narrative where I became fragile, buzzy, a glass left too near the edge. It was tidy, the way they choreographed it. A fragile woman stays home for Christmas. A fragile woman signs papers without reading. A fragile woman thanks you for managing her life. Tidy, plain.
Laughed, a brittle sound that startled me with its honesty. I thought of Christmas mornings, when I woke first to make cinnamon rolls, the way the house smelled like a bakery and a church. I thought of the birthday checks, the tuition transfers, the down payment miracles we treated like rain. I flipped a statement and traced columns with a pen, connecting years of ours to decades of mine. The math felt less like division and more like sight. I dialed Harold, our advisor, and left a message that used words like urgent and all accounts. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. Then I called the bank. The woman on the line had a warm, practiced tone. I matched it with a practiced calm. We reviewed login resets and card status, the way nurses discuss vitals during a code. I did not raise my voice. I did not apologize. When she asked for my mother's maiden name, I smiled, because my mother had warned me about kindness without boundaries. She had also taught me that a ledger is a story. Night fell early, as it does when winter has something to say. I lay awake, hearing the furnace click and the house settle like an old friend shifting in sleep. Anger did not come hot. It arrived cool, deliberate, arranging itself like a chessboard I suddenly remembered how to play. This was not about plane tickets or tapas. This was about edits made to my character arc, a slow rewrite where I became secondary in my own life. If they could write me smaller, they could write themselves larger. But authorship, like ownership, can be documented. Morning brought a sky the color of pewter, and a resolve that felt like a perfectly tailored coat. I put on my boots and went to Harold's office downtown, where the carpet always swallowed sound. He looked startled when I said, "Pull everything," then relieved when I said, "Thank you," without explaining why. Numbers do not care about tone. They reward attention. As we scrolled through balances, I saw my parents again. Factory hands who saved like squirrels and gave like saints. Their names breathed through dividends and deeds. I understood then. My life was not a favor they granted me. At home, I brewed coffee the way I like it. Too strong, no sugar, and opened the study blinds.
In the background, with a tone that had always grated but never cut. I asked to speak to her. I asked politely. I told her about $20,000 with my name on it and a deadline she would not like. She said gift. I said watch me. Practice can sound like power. I stood at the window and thought of the future the way you think of weather changing. Not sudden, not theatrical, just a front moving in, temperatures dropping, air clearing enough to see the horizon. Trust feels like air when it is there, and like absence when it is not. I touched the cold glass and whispered to the quiet house that I would no longer negotiate my place within it. Somewhere between the text and the tote bag, a boundary had taken shape. I did not regret it. I promised myself I never would. The clock ticked. 48 hours kept walking. They planned a holiday without me and left fingerprints everywhere. I began where hurt always sends you first. The little places you tidy without thinking. The shoe tray by the back door had 3 empty prints, heel to toe, still dusted with rock salt. A 4th spot, mine, was undisturbed. A square of innocence in a field of absence. On the hook, Thomas's travel hat was gone. The brim I reshaped each spring. David's old duffel was missing too. The one I stitched after a college trip. Nothing spectacular, nothing cinematic, just a careful subtraction that spoke louder than any confession. Thanksgiving looked different in the rear view. The night they arrived late, Rachel had hugged me with one arm while the other clutched the hallway like a handle. She set a tote by the coat closet and nudged it deeper with her heel. I had thought it was presents. Now I saw zippered edges and a luggage tag threaded with twine. When she joked about families that prioritize, I laughed because laughter is social grease. What I missed was the way David checked his phone and nodded at Thomas, as if meeting an unseen schedule that did not include me. In the study trash, the crumpled receipts became paragraphs. I smoothed them with my palm until the thin paper lay flat, the way a map surrenders once you stop folding it wrong. Iberia. MAD. Rachel's tone. Airport pickup. Carol. For years, I had been Margaret, or Mom, not Carol. The line was neat, confident. The city felt small in that moment. Organized. My life listed and omitted. I phoned the dry cleaner because sometimes truth wears starch. The owner, Mr. Patel, recognized my voice before I said my name. He thanked me for the early December rush and asked if I wanted the same fold for travel. I asked which items he meant. He read a list. Dress shirts, 2 pairs of slacks, a navy blazer that always meant good photos. He apologized that the scarf I liked could not be cleaned in time. Rachel had left it with the wrong ticket. The scarf was mine. The ticket was theirs. Small evidence, but evidence from a man who pressed facts. Next door, Mrs. Keene watered plants each winter when we visited my sister. She knocked at noon with a tin of cookies and a look that traveled to my eyes, stopped, then detoured to the floor. "Did they catch the early flight?" she asked. My head tilted before words arrived. She had given them a ride to the airport at dawn. They had said it was a surprise, for Mom. The lie was not barbed. It floated like a helium balloon and bumped a ceiling called hope. I thanked her and tasted sugar that felt like sand. Kind neighbors deserve better scripts. I drove to David's house because motion helps when stillness hurts. The SUV sat in the driveway, expensive and quiet, like a secret sleeping with one eye open. On the back seat, through the glass, a guidebook winked. Spain in winter. A paper wristband from an airport lounge curled near the cup holder, gold with tiny crowns. I thought of the $20,000 that had floated from my account months ago with a simple signature I did not interrogate. On the porch, a package waited with a label stamped travel adapters. I placed it neatly to the side. Boundaries can be courteous. Back home, the kitchen admitted more confessions. A recipe card for paella lay in the book I keep for birthdays and anniversaries. Someone had tucked a grocery note inside it months earlier. Saffron, smoked paprika, Kalisbara rice. 3 hands moving through one life, stalking and staging, rehearsing departures under my
Crossed at noon while I studied my watch in a different time zone. I thanked her and wrote down dates to pin the story to an actual calendar. By evening, the house glowed with that soft winter gold that makes even unpaid bills look romantic. I spread the clues on the table as if I were setting out placemats. Receipts, screenshots, a neighbor's kindness, and office approval stamped weeks in advance. I did not need a detective. I needed a spine. Each piece spoke the same sentence in a different accent. We planned the trip. We excluded you on purpose. We built a scaffolding of concern to hold the lie in place. None of it justified me erasing myself. My grief began to unclench its fist so my hand could dial. I called Harold again and left a message using words that pointed forward rather than back. I requested beneficiary changes, account reviews, and a meeting that would spend as much time on protection as it did on growth. After I hung up, I walked the rooms and touched what was mine by history and by law. The banister we sanded together, the wedding china I paid for piece by piece when love was a layaway plan. Wear patterns are testimonies. Ownership does not always need a lawyer to speak for it. Sometimes it needs a woman to remember she can speak. I stacked the papers, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the doorway. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a flight would return them to the ground. Somewhere in Madrid, a card would fail again, and a hotel manager would frown. The receipts hid one more detail, though. The travel insurance listed an emergency contact who was not me. That, more than anything, clarified the cast list. I exhaled and drew a line I could keep. If the people you love rewrite you out of the story, how do you write yourself back in? Gaslighting has a rhythm you do not notice until it syncs with your own breath. Rachel began softly, like a violin warming up. You seem tired lately, Margaret. A harmless kindness. Then, are you sure you remembered that? Spoken sweetly as if she feared for me. David echoed it with a gentle chuckle, and Thomas followed with, "We already did that, dear," even when the garage sat untouched. Their trio rehearsed together until my own voice, Harold, the advisor who had guided us for years. Sitting across his mahogany desk, I expected reassurance. Instead, his glasses fogged with discomfort. Thomas came to see me 3 weeks ago, he confessed. My body leaned forward without permission. He asked about transferring assets, naming David as backup on accounts, citing memory issues. The words did not echo. They landed. It was a script written without me, rehearsed in meetings I never attended. A play where my role was senile extra. I asked Harold to show me everything. He slid folders forward with fingers that trembled. The pages whispered betrayal in bureaucratic tones. Power of attorney drafts, asset transfer worksheets, even life insurance beneficiary notes, with my name fading into the margins. For decades, I had managed these details, balanced checkbooks with a ruler-straight pen, chosen funds with patience and foresight. Now suddenly, I was deemed incompetent. The irony was brutal. The very wealth that secured their comfort had painted me as disposable. I stared at signatures. His neat slanted hand, my hesitant initials added under pressure months ago, and understood that my trust had been weaponized. Trust is currency. They had spent mine lavishly. I left Harold's office with 2 truths folded in my coat pocket. First, that 70% of our wealth bore my name alone. Second, that narratives can be rewritten, but paper remembers. Outside, December wind slapped my face awake.
I walked past holiday windows where mannequins smiled in red sweaters. None of them had been excluded from Christmas. None of them were being erased by people they loved. My reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but not fragile. My outline remained solid. Fragility was their fiction. Paper proved otherwise. Paper would be my weapon. At home, I tested myself the way Rachel had tested me. I named streets I grew up on. The teacher from 6th grade. The scent of my grandmother's kitchen. I wrote them down with steady hand and even letters. I would seek a medical evaluation soon. Not because I doubted myself, but because documentation silences liars. Gaslighting thrives in ambiguity. Clarity is an antidote. I put the page on the refrigerator with the pen. The looped curiosity arrived as I opened Thomas's drawer and found documents half shuffled, papers shoved behind tax returns. Among them lay a medical pamphlet about capacity evaluations. I stared until the letters blurred. Were they planning to prove me incapable in court? To paint me as a woman confused about dates, unable to sign her own checks? Fear rushed in cold, then retreated under a harder resolve. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken patience for weakness. They had forgotten that the house deed bore my name, inked before Rachel ever entered this family. Paper would remember. I closed the drawer gently, as if tucking a child into bed, and stood straighter than I had in weeks. If they wanted to tell a story about my decline, I would write a counter story with facts and signatures. If they wanted to erase me, I would carve myself deeper into the record. Betrayal often begins with whispers, but it ends with documents, signatures, bank alerts. I understood now. Gaslighting was not just cruelty, it was strategy, and I was learning the rules. Would the truth be strong enough to unmask them all? I stood in the kitchen with papers spread like a broken deck of cards, and for the first time in months, I felt the ground shift in my favor. The numbers were mine. The house was mine. The investments bore my name. For years, I had thought of them as ours, but ownership has a way of clarifying when trust dies. I dialed Harold again, firm this time, and demanded immediate transfers. Every joint account drained into fresh ones, solely under my control. The passwords I chose were not sentimental dates, but iron gates. Their Christmas vacation would soon become a lesson. The bank's representative confirmed what I already knew. My inheritance had built this life. Not Thomas's career, not Rachel's ambitions. My father's factory hours, my mother's thrift, my 30 years at the firm, all converted into columns that funded their comfort. I moved money with steady fingers, as if stitching a seam tighter so it would never rip again, while they toasted in Spain, sipping Rioja with smug laughter, their safety net frayed strand by strand. I imagined Rachel opening her purse at certificates of deposit. Each paper whispered the same truth. They had gambled with a deck they did not own. My parents' inheritance loomed large on every page, the backbone of our fortune. I felt them near in that moment, their frugality transformed into armor. For so long, I had softened my edges to keep peace. Now, edges would be my salvation. Inheritance is not just money. It is memory. And memory would not be rewritten by people who thought I was disposable. The mini twist came when Harold called back, voice careful, as if speaking to a live wire. "Margaret, Thomas attempted a transfer last week. He asked for authorization to move a portion of your retirement account." My jaw clenched, but my answer was calm. "Denied?" "Yes," Harold replied, "but he seemed confident you wouldn't notice." Confidence is fragile. It cracks when exposed to daylight. I thanked Harold and hung up. So Thomas had been rehearsing control even before the plane ticket. He believed I was blind. Blindness was their illusion. I saw now with frightening clarity.
The following morning, I walked into the mortgage office with my tote of documents. The young clerk smiled, unaware she was watching a woman rewrite her life. "This house," I said, laying the deed flat, "is mine, correct?" She verified, nodded. "Paid in full years ago with funds from my inheritance." Thomas had always joked he was a tenant here. The joke had ripened into truth. If he tried to twist this into his domain, paper would refuse him. I left the office lighter than when I entered. The house was no longer a shared stage. It was my fortress. That night, I sat at the dining table where countless meals had been shared and silently cut off the lines they had strung through me. I reset every online password, banking, investments, even the streaming services Rachel and David used without asking. Each login became a door I closed with a satisfying click. I did not slam them. I locked them. A fortress doesn't need noise to be strong. Somewhere across the ocean, they were still smiling, still sipping, still certain. They had not yet felt the earth open beneath their feet, but the tremor was on its way. By the end of the week, I had drawn new child, but their words would bounce off walls lined with documents in my name. I was no longer a ghost in their story. I was the author of mine. The foreshadowing gleamed quietly in my mind. When their cards failed, when their vacation crumbled, when the bank refused them, they would know the cost of erasing me. Would they beg or would they fight? I folded the last document, turned off the lamp, and let the house rest. In 40 years, I had played the roles of wife, mother, provider. Now, I added another, guardian of my own future. Their Spain trip had been a celebration without me. My revenge was simple. Let them taste life without me entirely, and soon they would. But when the phone finally rang again, would I answer? Or would silence speak more loudly than any word I could say? The first call came at dawn, the international code flashing on my phone like a siren. I let it ring twice before I answered. Thomas's voice cracked with urgency. "Margaret, there's some problem with our accounts. The hotel can't process the card." His tone was half annoyance, half disbelief, as though the universe had erred rather than him. I sipped my coffee before answering. "How is Spain, Thomas?" Silence filled the line. Then Rachel's voice rose in the background, sharp and impatient. "Ask her what she did." I smiled faintly. They had rehearsed a play without me. Now they were stranded on stage. He tried again, softening his voice, calling me dear, as though that word could erase a holiday spent without me. "It was just a small trip, Margaret. Rachel thought David needed time with his father. You've been so tired lately." Tired, forgetful, dramatic. Each word had been a stitch in their fabric of lies. I laid my palm flat against the table. Steady. "You lied. You planned for months. And you left me behind." His protest stumbled over the crackle of the overseas connection. Rachel's sharper whisper cut through. "Dramatic old woman." The insults carried across an ocean, unfiltered. "Put her on the phone," I said. Thomas hesitated, but Rachel's voice soon oozed through the line. "Hi, Margaret. We thought you might prefer staying home. The travel, the food."
"Calm. Margaret, what have you done?"
His fear was the answer. "I've taken back what was mine," I said simply. The hotel manager spoke in the background, impatient. The world around them was crumbling, and all I had done was say no. I ended the call and let the silence settle in my kitchen like a heavy quilt. For years, I had answered every request, filled every gap, paid every bill. Now the absence of my support echoed louder than my presence ever had. I wondered what Rachel's face looked like as the reality sank in, whether her confidence cracked as easily as her smile. They had thought me weak, irrelevant, erased. But weakness does not freeze an account. Irrelevance does not cancel credit cards. Erasure does not speak with authority. My voice, calm and measured,
had undone their holiday in a single morning. By afternoon, more calls buzzed my phone. I declined them. Each voicemail was a different tone: pleading, angry, apologetic. "Rachel is crying," Thomas said in one. "David doesn't understand what's happening." But I understood. For the first time, I understood completely. They had counted on me being silent. They had counted on my love as a leash. They had never counted on me choosing myself. Their tears did not soften me. Their panic did not move me. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee and watched snow fall across the yard. Peace tasted stronger than guilt. That night, I called Patricia, our old lawyer. Her voice carried the weight of both law and empathy. After I explained, she said the words I needed. "What you've described is financial elder abuse. Even if it's family, it's abuse." I felt my chest loosen. Abuse had always been a word for other women, not for me. Yet here it was, accurate, undeniable. Patricia assured me every step I'd taken was legal. She promised to draft additional protections, including documentation of my full mental competence. Their narrative of a fragile woman was dissolving under the ink of professionals who knew the truth. The next day, I imagined them in Spain, scrambling. The credit cards I once paid for were dead plastic. The joint accounts they leaned on were empty shells. They had only
and whispered to the empty room, "This is only the beginning." And I meant it. Their countdown had started, not mine. Would I forgive them when they returned? Or would forgiveness be another leash I refused to wear? The doorbell rang 2 days later, early enough that frost still glazed the porch. When I opened it, my family stood there with luggage scuffed from hurried travel. Thomas's tie hung loose, David's shoulders slumped, and Rachel's face burned with rage. They had come home sooner than planned. Not triumphant, but cornered. Thomas tried for calm authority. "Margaret, we need to talk." His voice had the weight of 43 years, but my silence had grown heavier. I gestured them inside, not out of welcome, but out of habit. The kitchen, once our gathering place, would now be the courtroom. We sat at the table where I had served countless Sunday dinners. This time, I served only papers, bank statements, receipts, account summaries, all spread like evidence before a jury. Thomas reached for one, then hesitated, as if touching it might brand him guilty. David stood behind Rachel, eyes avoiding mine. "You left us stranded," Rachel hissed. Her words tumbled too quickly, less accusation than desperation. "We had to borrow money to eat. The hotel threatened to call the police." She wanted me to feel shame. Instead, I felt clarity. "How terrible," I said evenly, to taste hunger for the first time. The mini twist came when I pulled out photos I had taken at Harold's office. Copies of the very documents Thomas had asked about. Power of attorney drafts, asset transfers, signatures without my full knowledge. "Explain these," I said. His face drained of color. He began to protest, but I cut him short. "Do not tell me it was for my benefit. Do not tell me it was precaution. These papers were weapons, and you aimed them at me." Rachel tried to interrupt, calling me paranoid, but the proof lay silent between us. Paranoia does not carry account numbers and signatures. "Mom." David finally spoke, voice quiet, almost pleading. "It wasn't like that." I turned to him, seeing not my little boy, but a man hiding behind his wife's anger and his father's silence. "Then tell me what it was." "A gift." I leaned forward, eyes steady. "No, Rachel, it was theft, hidden in kindness. You wanted the benefits of my generosity without the burden of my presence." Her lips parted, but no defense came. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Margaret, let's not make this uglier than it needs to be." I laughed softly, the sound startling even me. "Uglier? You lied for months, erased me from my own family, plotted to strip me of competence and wealth. The ugliness was born in your choices.
I am only holding up a mirror. He sagged back, older suddenly, as if the weight of his betrayal had aged him overnight. For decades, I had softened truth to preserve his dignity. Now dignity was his to fight for, not mine to protect. The atmosphere thickened, and for a moment I thought David might speak again, might apologize. Instead, Rachel filled the silence with venom. You can't control everything forever, Margaret. Families evolve. Maybe you're not the center anymore. Her words stung, not because they were false, but because they were cruelly true. I was not the center, but I was the foundation. The beams beneath their roof, the account numbers behind their comfort. They had mistaken foundation for furniture, assuming it could be replaced. If you want independence, I told them, you will have it completely. I gathered the papers, stacking them with deliberate precision. This house, I said, tapping the deed, is mine. The accounts you used are mine. The comfort you enjoyed was mine. If you want respect, you will show it. If you want support, you will earn it. If not, you will learn what life without me feels like. Rachel's face flushed crimson. Thomas stared at the table, and David's eyes finally lifted to mine. Wet, conflicted, ashamed. For a heartbeat, I saw my son again. Then Rachel touched his arm, and the moment broke. He looked away. Complicity returned. They left soon after, muttering about cruelty, about betrayal, about family. Their words did not shake me. Betrayal had already shattered what mattered. I watched from the window as they loaded their luggage back into the car. Their voices rose in argument. Rachel's sharp, Thomas's weary, David's muffled. The car pulled. Can't control us forever, Margaret. You've had your turn. It wasn't anger that chilled me. It was her certainty. The next morning, Thomas tried again, softer. She's upset. Don't take her words to heart. He sounded tired, older than his years, caught between loyalty and guilt. Thomas, I said quietly, do you remember when we first bought this house? When we painted the walls ourselves and ate sandwiches on the floor? He chuckled weakly. Of course I do. Then why? I asked, voice sharp now. Do you let her call me an obstacle in the very home I built? His silence answered better than words. Silence had become his language, and silence was complicity. The mini twist came during David's visit 2 days later. He arrived alone, or so I thought. I opened the door to find him hesitant, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Mom, he began. Rachel didn't mean it like that. She just... From the driveway, Rachel's voice cut in. Don't apologize for me, David. She had followed him, waiting in the car like a general overseeing her soldier. My son's eyes flickered between loyalty and shame. I just wanted to make peace, he whispered. My heart ached for him. The boy who once held my hand on icy sidewalks. But the man before me was bound by her grip. I let him inside, ignoring her glare through the windshield. We sat with tea cooling between us. David, I said, I raised you to stand tall, to tell the truth even when it hurts. Look at me now and tell me if you believe I'm weak, forgetful, incapable. His eyes filled, but he looked away. It's not about that, Mom. Rachel she thinks you try to control everything. His words were softer than hers, but cut just as deep. Control, I repeated. Or protect. Was it control when I paid your tuition? When I kept this house from foreclosure during the recession? His silence weighed more than his words. Rachel stormed in then, unable to wait. Her coat still zipped, cheeks flushed from the cold. You can't guilt him forever, she snapped. He has his another move. But this time, I was ready. They had mistaken love for weakness once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Would Rachel push David further from me until he no longer looked back?
Or would my son finally remember whose strength had built the ground he stood on? The snow outside had begun to melt, yet inside the house, the air was colder than winter. A knock rattled the front door at noon, sharp and insistent. When I opened it, a courier stood holding a thick envelope. "For Mrs. Margaret Hayes," he said, handing me documents with Thomas's familiar handwriting on the cover. My stomach dropped. Inside were preliminary papers, power of attorney drafts, asset transfers, even a clause suggesting competency review. My husband had tried to legalize the whispers Rachel had planted. I felt the room tilt, but instead of falling, I steadied myself. Evidence was no longer just suspicion. It was in my hands. That evening, Thomas returned early, his face pinched. He'd expected surprise, perhaps confrontation, but not calm. I laid the papers on the table between us. "Explain," I said simply. His hands twitched toward the stack, then retreated. "It's just planning, in case something happens to you." His tone was soft, almost paternal, but I saw the truth. He no longer viewed me as partner, but as obstacle. "Planning?" I repeated. "Or erasing?" My voice did not rise, but the stillness of it made him flinch. The mini twist came when Rachel entered behind him, uninvited yet utterly at home. She perched on a chair as if she owned it. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is standard. Lots of families prepare for the future." I looked at her, really looked, and saw no daughter, no ally, only a woman who saw my years of sacrifice as a prize to claim. "If you want the future," I said, "earn it by respect, not deceit." She smirked. "Respect doesn't pay mortgages." My heart ached at the brazenness, but anger cooled it like steel plunged in water. I shifted strategy. Instead of fighting, I asked questions. "Thomas, who paid off this house?" Silence. "Rachel, who funded your car?" Her eyes flickered. "And David's college?" Clarity. They were building walls of lies, but every wall casts a shadow, and shadows reveal what light cannot hide. I tucked the papers into my drawer, not as fear, but as proof. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. What happens when a family forces a mother into a corner she built herself? The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from my attorney, Ms. Donovan. Her voice was steady, but the message left me breathless. "Margaret, I received inquiries from Thomas yesterday. He asked about guardianship procedures. I think he may be preparing to argue diminished capacity. We should meet immediately." Guardianship. It was no longer a whisper or suspicion. It was a plan. One that would erase my voice, my control, my freedom. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone, but the fear quickly turned into fire. If they wanted a battle for my life, I would give them one. At the meeting, Ms. Donovan spread the documents across her polished desk. "They don't have much ground, not legally, but perception matters. If they've been laying a trail of you being forgetful, confused," she hesitated, "it could sway a judge if not countered." I thought of every moment Rachel had planted those seeds, every time Thomas had gently confirmed them. The betrayal felt like poison in my veins. "Then I want an independent evaluation," I said firmly. "I want medical proof that my mind is sharp. They won't turn my love into evidence against me." The mini twist struck that evening when I returned home. A letter slid under my door, unsigned but unmistakable in tone. "Step aside before you lose everything. Families who cling too tightly end up alone." The handwriting wasn't Thomas's. It was Rachel's, rushed and sharp. A threat on my own floor, in my own house. Instead of fear, I felt clarity. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was declaring war. And in that declaration, she'd made her biggest mistake, underestimating me again. I called David that night, deciding to face him directly. "Son," I began softly, "do you truly believe I'm losing my mind?"
The silence on the line stretched until I thought he'd hung up. Finally, his voice cracked. Rachel said,
Woman they tried to erase. And as I sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the papers, I knew the next move would shatter everything. Would my family finally see me as the foundation? Or would they tear the house down around us all? I woke the next day to a silence that felt different. Not heavy, not hollow, but open. Like the calm after a storm. The house stood just as it always had, yet it finally felt like mine. For months I had been treated as invisible, as if my years of sacrifice and love were footnotes in someone else's story. Now, every picture on the wall and every chair in the room whispered a reminder. I had been the one holding this family together, even when they chose to forget. Their betrayal had not erased me. It had revealed me. The following week, my lawyer confirmed that the changes I'd made stood firm. The accounts were secured in my name, the house protected, the legal groundwork prepared. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving on blind trust. I was living on deliberate choice. My heart still hurt, but the ache was no longer weakness. It was a scar, forming over a wound, proof that I had endured. When Thomas called again, his voice weary and uncertain, I listened without anger. "We can fix this," he said. But what he meant was, we can go back to the way things were. And that was one thing I no longer wanted. The mini twist arrived when David came to see me alone. His eyes were tired, his shoulders slumped, the weight of divided loyalties finally visible. "Mom," he began, "I know now that Rachel crossed lines we shouldn't have allowed. I'm sorry." For a moment, the boy I once knew flickered in front of me. The boy who trusted me with every secret, who looked for me in the crowd. I placed my hand on his. "I forgive you," I said. "But forgiveness isn't forgetting. If we rebuild, it will be on truth, not silence." He nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw hope instead of distance. Yet the clearest lesson wasn't about David or Thomas or Rachel. It was about me. For decades, I had measured my worth by chains of silence. When you choose self-respect over fear, you stop being erased. You start being free. Before we part, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal from those you trusted most? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments. I promise, someone who needs it will read it. If this journey moved you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with a friend who believes in the power of family and the courage of truth. I'll see you again soon with another story of love, loss, and the lessons that shape us. Until then, remember, family isn't just who claims you, it's who respects you.